My family joked, with such an expression on their faces as if it were something insignificant, almost funny, and I simply could not believe what a tiny amount they mentioned just the other day, as if they had forgotten everything I had done for them for so many years, and I listened with bated breath as my heart sank with pain, as if someone had suddenly questioned all my kindness, everything I had shared, denying myself little things in order to be useful. My phone did not stop ringing, buzzing again and again, as if demanding that I finally stop ignoring my parents' persistent calls, and when, tired and worried, I finally pressed the green button and put the phone to my ear, without having time to say a word, I was deafened by screams, as if they had broken out of a long chain of grievances and expectations that for some reason they considered reasonable. My father was shouting especially loudly, his voice was shaking, and at first I couldn't even understand what he was saying. I just felt how with every second the wave of misunderstanding was rising higher and higher, knocking me off my feet, like in a storm, when you can't see the bottom and don't know where to swim. Later, when I had caught my breath, I finally realized that all this rage was directed at me because of the money that they thought I was secretly sending to my sister, as if it were a betrayal, a treason, and not just my attempt to support the family. It turned out that they were convinced that I could be trusted with only a tiny part of the total assistance. They called it 880 CS, some figure that they apparently convinced themselves, when in fact, for months, I was sending them the same $112,000 monthly, like Merera, no more, no less, observing our agreement, without missing a single payment. But they didn't believe me. "You must be lying," my father said, barely containing his irritation, his voice low, almost ominous, as if he were speaking to me not as a daughter but as a stranger. "Mara makes more money, she's a model, you know. She always sends $112,000 every month. We're so disappointed in you, Amanda." And those words hit harder than I expected, because inside I was still that girl who, as a child, tried to earn even a crumb of their approval. My mother joined in, her voice high and weary, intolerant, even contemptuous. "You live on your own, spend your money however you want, act like you have no responsibilities. Why can't you be more like your sister? She's so caring. So thoughtful." And before we continue, write in the comments what city you are watching this video from. Enjoy! I sighed heavily, slowly, as if drawing in not just air, but all the fatigue that had accumulated over the years. I had always felt that they favored Maria, always, ever since she had just learned to speak and already riveted everyone's gaze as soon as she walked into a room. She was stunning, impossibly beautiful, with an easy gait, a cheeky smile, with that ability to charm people that seemed to be in her blood, while I, being the eldest, often remained in the shadows, as if I did not exist. People were constantly comparing us. "That's beautiful," they would say, looking at Mir, and then immediately turn to me with a forced smile, throwing into the air something like, "Well, you're different, Amanda." I knew from an early age that Mir was destined to be a star. She acted in school plays, took part in beauty contests, and I sat on the sidelines, with a notebook and books, inconspicuous and quiet. Our parents adored her, without a shadow of a doubt, without trying to hide it. They made sure that she had the most fashionable clothes, signed her up for dance lessons, vocal lessons, acting, everything she wanted. I wore the house clothes that were left after her, and did not attend any clubs. "Don't complain, Amanda, you don't need all this," they said, waving me off. Merera grew up spoiled and naive, firmly believing that everything that was mine was hers too. She would take my things without asking, and when I would finally say something, resentful, my parents would shrug, "Let it go, Amanda. She's younger. Be a good big sister." They ignored my feelings as if they didn't exist, as if I wasn't a person but a shadow serving her light. And it only got worse as the years went by. In elementary school, I remember when Mara suddenly announced that she wanted her own room. My parents didn't hesitate for a second. They just packed up my things and moved me into the living room. "You don't have much stuff, honey," my mother said, as if to console me, but there was no sympathy in her voice. "There's enough room to sleep." And there I was, in that gloomy, cool living room, surrounded by old portraits, the hum of the refrigerator and the flickering light of the lamp, as if I had simply been erased from the comfort of home. At some point, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to stop sending money, hoping that it would make them stop and think for once, to notice me, to realize that I was more than just a shadow. My name is Amanda. I'm 31. I work for a food processing company, living alone, with the heavy, invisible weight of being the less loved child. My little sister, Mara, is 6 years younger and still basks in the attention and love that I never received. But despite the cold, despite all the years of pain and comparison, I still hold on to the warm memory of the two people who truly saw me. My grandparents, they adored me. They were the only ones who looked at me with such tenderness, like I was a gift. My name, Amanda, was chosen by my grandfather on that spring day when the amandas bloomed, and he said that these flowers are resilient, no matter what, and I should be named after them. As a child, I loved to sit on his lap, feeling the warmth of his hands, listening to him whisper, "Amanda, no matter how hard it is, you can always cope. Happiness will return. It will bloom like a mandysia in the spring." These words of my grandfather, full of quiet strength and some almost childish faith that everything, even the most difficult, will definitely pass, and spring will bloom again ahead, often returned to me, especially in those moments when I felt lost, alone, as if there was no solid ground under my feet, and around me there was only the noise of misunderstanding and the eternal comparison with my sister, whom my parents put on a pedestal. Over the years, as I grew older, this feeling, that Mira and I were perceived in completely different ways, became unbearably obvious, as if there were two worlds in our house, one bright, festive, affectionate, for her, and one reserved, cool, demanding, for me. I never felt at home in my own house, and even the walls seemed to remind me that I was just a background, a shadow in the life of this family. I remember how one day, having plucked up the courage, I told my parents that I dreamed of becoming a school nurse. I thought it was an honest, kind job, that it would suit me, because I had always cared about others, was a good listener, noticed details. I wanted to talk about entrance exams, about scholarships, about trying to find ways. But my parents did not even let me finish. "We can't afford university fees," my father said, staring at the newspaper, not looking up at me. "You know, we have to think about me's future. We're saving for her." These words sounded like a death sentence. At that moment, I realized that my dreams were not only unimportant, they were in the way, they were intruding on what had long been decided for me. And this despite the fact that we were not poor, an ordinary family, a stable income, nothing out of the ordinary. It's just that the priorities were set unmistakably. Mira was the center, and I was the other side. My dreams were put in a drawer, closed and forgotten to make room for my sister's grandiose plans. After finishing school, when we entered a prestigious university, with cries of joy, with champagne, with family photos in which I stood to the side, slightly out of frame, I went to work. I found a position in a food processing company, half an hour by train from its campus. It was not my calling, but the work gave me at least some independence, and soon I was able to rent a tiny studio apartment next to the office. It was like a breath, like the first drop of silence after a long noise, to be alone, in a space where no one told me that I should be different. Meanwhile, Mira was shining. At university, she was doing well in everything, studying, parties, and meeting new people. And then, one day, when she went shopping with her friends, a representative of a modeling agency noticed her, just on the street, like in a movie. Her parents were in seventh heaven, our girl. She will have a career. And the days were filled with talk about shows, photo shoots, trips. And I was sitting at work, counting invoices and silently listening to their enthusiastic stories on the phone. One day, Mara called herself. Her voice was excited, quick, and full of gratitude. "Amanda, we owe everything to Mom and Dad," she said. "Let's start giving them $12,000 every month to show our gratitude." I almost dropped the phone. $120,000. It was a huge amount of money. Of course, Mara could afford it. Her modeling contracts brought in decent money. But me? At my job, I made about $66,000 a month, and to fulfill such a commitment, I would have to not only cut back on spending, but literally turn myself inside out. I did not want to fall behind, did not want to be the one who refused, again, not like Mara. So, although it was not right away, I agreed. I got a second job, as a security guard at a construction site on weekends. It was hard, tiring work. In the summer, the scorching sun, the heat that darkened your eyes. In winter, a piercing cold that made my fingers go numb even with gloves on. I thought about giving up more than once, especially on those sleepless nights when it seemed like I just had no strength left. But something inside pushed me forward, maybe pride, maybe stubbornness, or maybe those very words of my grandfather that I repeated to myself like a mantra: happiness will return. It will bloom in the spring. I was dragging 2 jobs on my back, barely sleeping, exhausting myself to the limit, but, strangely enough, my colleagues at the construction site treated me with amazing warmth. The guys brought me coffee, someone threw me sandwiches, someone an old but warm jacket. They understood, they saw that I was trying. I cut back on all possible expenses, stopped eating out, did not buy clothes, did not spend on anything except the bare necessities. And yet, having collected $122,000, I kept my promise. I sent everything home. And it was still not enough, in the eyes of my parents. I was tired, but I still decided to increase my income. I chose a professional retraining program, a certificate that would allow me to apply for a promotion. I lived in this crazy rhythm: work, study, work. There was no free time at all. The days turned into one continuous stream. I was so immersed in this race that I missed several calls from my parents. And when, finally, late in the evening, I found a minute to call back, I was immediately met with a stream of irritation and instant anger. "You are terrible. What do you think of us?" My father shouted as soon as I answered the phone, and there was so much hurt and disappointment in his voice that it took my breath away, and the next second my mother's voice, echoing the accusations, added a painful weight to the moment, as if the two of them had decided not just to express their displeasure, but to make me feel how deeply I had betrayed them. I asked, confused, what had happened, because all I knew was that I had been transferring money faithfully, every month, sometimes even to the detriment of my own peace, health, and sleep, and therefore their anger seemed unfounded, illogical, as if they were talking to someone else entirely. "Are you seriously asking?" My father did not let up. "Do you think we don't know how much you send? Mara sends $112,000, and you only send $80. 80, Amanda. Are you kidding us?" I felt a wave of shock, resentment, and some kind of formless but strong despair rise up inside me. After all, I was sending exactly the same amount as Mara, not a cent less. "That's impossible," I said firmly, trying not to give in to panic. "I send $112,000 every month, like we agreed." But my father, not listening, continued with growing disappointment. "Don't lie. Mara is a model. She makes more money than you will ever make in your life. She is the one sending us $112,000. We are so disappointed in you, Amanda. Maya is a smart girl, she takes care of the family, and you are just pretending." I sat with the phone in my hand, speechless, unable to immediately formulate any intelligible answer, because all this seemed absurd, an inverted reflection of the reality in which I had tried to live up to for so many years. Mom didn't keep quiet either. Her voice became colder, more abrupt. "All you do is think about yourself. Everything you do is work, overwork, study. And have you ever thought about us? About your family?" I felt like I was underwater, in some kind of viscous and echoing space where it was impossible to explain anything. But then a memory dawned on me, like a flash in the fog, that put everything in its place. I remembered how at the very beginning, when Mira and I had just decided to send money to our parents, she suggested introducing a system of anonymity, like, let's not sign the transfers with our real names, so as not to provoke comparisons, and let's call our contributions Rainbow, in English, Rainbow. Then I just nodded, tired of endless comparisons, without thinking about the details, and she used the stage name Rain, short for Rain, which is so easy to confuse with something bright, common, kind. And now it turned out that the transaction system had mistakenly credited her $122,000 to her stage name, while the 80-cent transfers, some kind of system error, a glitch, or even a joke, had been recorded in my name, Amanda. I tried to tell my parents this, mustering up my calm. "Please, listen, this is all a mistake. Rain is Mara, you yourself," but they didn't even listen to me. "We don't need your mocking 80 cents, my father growled and abruptly hung up. I was left sitting with the phone in my hand, in complete silence, feeling hot tears rolling down my cheeks. Not from weakness, no, but from this feeling of betrayal and injustice, from the pain that had been building up for years and now spilled out like a sudden hurricane. I felt a mixture of rage and resentment at Mara, who had suggested this system without even bothering to clarify the situation, without bothering to warn my parents how the scheme worked. It all fell on my shoulders, along with sleepless nights, exhausting work, and this constant feeling that I was always in the background. I needed to hear someone else's, a sober voice, so I wrote to my school friend Scarlett, who worked for a large consulting firm and had always been known for a clear mind and ability to give practical advice even in the most confusing situations. Scarlett was surprised by my urgent request for a meeting, but agreed without hesitation. "What's wrong?" she asked when we met for lunch in a quiet cafe overlooking the park. I knew my face was giving everything away, dark circles under my eyes, pursed lips, hands tightly clutching a cup of tea. I told her everything, about the family, about sending money, about Mara and her stage name, about the damn mistake that had ruined everything, and, most importantly, how I felt, humiliated, tired, burned out. Scarlett listened attentively, without interrupting, and then, frowning slightly, said, "Amanda, are your parents having financial difficulties?" "They're in their 80s, aren't they?" I nodded. "It sounds like they're in debt," she added. "But still, $112,000 a month is a staggering amount of money. What are they even doing with it?" I shrugged. I didn't understand it myself. We continued talking, and Scarlett, as always, helped me put the situation into perspective. She gently reminded me that when Mara first suggested sending money to my parents, it was supposed to be an act of gratitude, not a debt yoke. "You didn't even go to college, did you?" she said, looking up at me with a keen gaze. "That money was spent mostly on her. Your father is still working. There is simply no need to send such sums." I remained silent, looking into my cup, in which the tea had already grown cold. "If they think you are giving them 80 cents, she continued, "maybe this is their way of saying, enough. Take the hint. And stop. You are too kind, Amanda. You should not allow yourself to be pushed around." Scarlett advised me not to give in to pressure, no matter how subtle and caring it was, and although her words, spoken in a good-natured, almost casual manner, touched a nerve in me, in that part of me that still hoped to be acknowledged, loved, needed, I realized that it was time to finally stop letting my family define my moral duty depending on their whim and convenience. I decided not to give in so easily, not to give in again, as I had done dozens of times before, and the very next day I stopped transferring. 3 months passed, and all this time my phone seemed to come alive, reminding me of itself every day. Calls, messages, notifications. I saw the screen light up with the names of my parents and Mara, but I did not answer, because I knew that if I gave in again, she would drag me in again. And then, one morning, when I was getting ready for work and thinking about how to make ends meet after the rent went up, the phone rang. It was Mara. Even before she spoke, I could tell she was angry, annoyed, or maybe just scared. "Why haven't you answered your phone all morning?" Her voice was sharp, almost accusing. "And why did you stop sending money? Who the hell were you thinking, Amanda?" I froze, holding the phone to my ear, feeling a surge of uncertainty and guilt, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I was being made to feel like I was the source of everything that was wrong once again. I paused to respond, choosing my words carefully, because the weight of the accusations coming from her lips was heavier than I'd expected, especially at a time when I was barely coping with my own life. But I knew more now. Thanks to Scarlett, who turned out to be not only an old friend but also a close acquaintance of one of our mutual friends, I had access to information I'd never thought to seek out before. She began collecting data, subtly, bit by bit. And what she found stunned me. Myra's much talked about financial contributions were in fact a way to cover up her vulnerability and indulge her pride, and most importantly, to save face in front of our parents. Mara, it turned out, regularly complained to her friends, "My older sister is my source of income, so lately I've been relying on her money." And this seemed completely natural to her, as if I was by default obliged to support her lifestyle, in which a beautician cost more than my rent and daily trips to boutiques were perceived as a necessity. For Mara, the idea of giving up facials or cutting back on cosmetics was perceived as a tragedy, as if it were vital. But the bitterest thing was not even this, it was that my mother, as it turned out, bought only luxury brands, and my father, who had not worked for 2 years, quietly became interested in gambling, spending the same money that I earned at the construction site at night on bets and slot machines. I listened to all this, frozen with disgust and a sense of absurdity, because no matter how hard I tried, these people, these loved ones, lived as if my efforts were only their right. You think I don't know? Escaped from me when we finally talked later, and I could no longer contain my bitterness. Dad still works, so why do you need my money, huh? But they were silent. However, soon the silence was replaced by something else, a demand. Once they realized that the transfers had stopped for good, and Mara, in tears, admitted that she didn't earn as much as she said, and that her modeling contracts were rare, low-paying, with irregular shoots for little-known online stores, they called me again. We were strict with you, my father said, in a voice that did not contain a shadow of remorse. But don't worry, just keep sending money as before. My mother, without batting an eyelid, added, you understand, we've been preparing for these 3 months. Please, pay when you can. You've always been reliable. Their impudence hit me like a cold shower. They didn't apologize, didn't express regret, they simply issued an invoice, as if I were the accounting department, obliged to provide comfort. That was the last straw. Their relentless, almost shameless greed finally forced me to ask the question I probably should have asked years ago. I asked them to explain their real financial needs. Mira told me you were in debt. Is that true? I asked, hoping for honesty, even if it was bitter. But my father just snorted. There are no debts. We just can't cover your tuition with your grandparents' inheritance. His voice was dismissive, as if everything I knew and felt didn't matter. This conversation was a revelation. I suddenly realized how far reality had deviated from the picture I had been told for so many years. Everything I believed in, everything I lived by, turned out to be built on lies, expectations, and manipulation. It became clear to me, it was time to make decisions based not on a sense of duty, not on love imposed with a distorted meaning, but on an honest assessment of what is fair, reasonable, and moral. When I pointed out Mara's words about debts, my father, without hesitation, waved it off. That's just a lie. We just need a little more for shopping. And my mother added with such ease that her words made me feel physically uneasy, your father's salary is quite sufficient. We are doing great. After all, we are not asking for much. And then I finally understood, they do not need my participation, not out of love, not out of need. They need it as a matter of course. Why is Amir getting a permanent job? This question, asked by my parents almost with disdain, caught me off guard and caused growing irritation, because it was asked not out of concern, not out of interest in my successes or plans, but as another reproach, an attempt to hurt, to question my independence, my right to manage my own life. I felt a feeling of despair slowly boiling inside, turning into disappointment, in their attitude, in their words, in how each time I saw more and more clearly how alien I had been to them all this time. And when I, having gathered my courage, tried to object, my father interrupted me with a sharp, rude voice. How do you even talk to your parents? Have you forgotten who raised you? I tried to take a breath, to swallow the lump in my throat, but before I could answer, my mother had already joined in. I didn't raise my daughter to behave like this. We don't need a daughter like you if you're going to keep doing this. The words hit hard, because there was no doubt behind them, no longing or attempt to understand, only a cold detachment, as if my entire existence were a mistake they were ready to undo. Then, as if to finish me off, they threatened to use the savings my grandfather, the only person who had ever truly loved me, had left just for me. We're just using your grandfather's savings for you, my father said, and I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, and then, completely calmly, as if he were not talking about a living person, he added, you're not part of this family anymore. They were ready to erase me from their lives, like tearing out a page that gets in the way of a picture. These words, spoken with such ease, pierced me to the depths of my soul. I sat in my small apartment after they left, silently, clenching my hands until my knuckles turned white, feeling something breaking inside, as if the remnants of hope, the last threads of belonging to this family, were breaking one after another. I felt unnecessary, betrayed, non-existent, and began to doubt whether I had the right to love, support, acceptance at all. 3 months of silence passed like one viscous, dark day. And then one morning the doorbell rang. I was not expecting anyone. I did not know who to expect. Opening the door, I froze. My parents and mother stood before me. Their faces were drawn, exhausted, their gaze dull. They looked not like the people who drove me away, but like shadows of themselves. I hesitated. Everything in me screamed, "Don't let them in, don't open your heart again." But I opened it, out of curiosity, out of politeness, out of human pity. And, admittedly, the contrast between how they looked and how I had changed was too obvious to go unnoticed. I had worked tirelessly for months, finally receiving the long-awaited certificate of a small business consultant, a diploma that stood for sleepless nights, tired eyes, and a quiet belief in myself. Scarlett not only supported me morally, but also helped me with employment. I became a team leader, enjoying a full working life for the first time in my life, feeling respected not by duty, but by merit. I even thought about moving, closer to work, to an apartment where there would be more light, silence, and space for my books. And all this, without anyone's help, without handouts, without expectations that dissipated at the very first step. And so, looking at me, rested, dressed in new, albeit not luxury, but decent clothes, with light makeup and a clear look, my parents suddenly spoke with an almost accusatory intonation. "What is it with your luxury?" said my mother, casting a sharp glance at me. "Before indulging in such luxury, think, maybe you will give us some money first." My father picked up. "You must understand, we are in a difficult situation." Their tone was neither apologetic nor cautious. They asked as if they were demanding. They spoke as if they had the right to do so. For the first time, I did not lose my head. I looked straight at them and said calmly, without anger, but with a firmness that I had lacked before, "Father's income and the money that Mara received could well have provided you with a comfortable life." What really happened? At that moment, Mara's eyes filled with tears. She looked down, and finally, as if confessing to a crime, she began to speak. Her voice was shaking. "I was noticed by another agency. I really thought that if I invested there, I would start a career in film, but they disappeared. It was a scam. I invested everything I had. It's all gone." She did not finish, because the doorbell rang again. I opened it. A representative of the Consumer Credit Company was standing on the threshold. Politely, but insistently, he asked, "Are you Amanda?" "A relative of the family." My heart sank. I nodded, cautiously. It turned out that they took out a large loan, listing my address as a possible place of residence. Hoping that Mara's career would take off, they invested everything and more. But it was not enough. Mara began to spend money in clubs, on expensive drinks, trying to forget, relieve stress, and all this only made the situation worse. I stood there, listening to this story, frozen with horror, with their irresponsibility, with the realization of how easily they had put everything on the line, dragging me into their quagmire. When the agent asked me directly, "Are you responsible for their debts?" I looked him in the eye and, for the first time in my life, without flinching, said, "I don't know these people. I have no connection with them." It was abrupt, rude, harsh. But it was necessary. To protect myself. To put an end to it. To not let their destructive behavior drag me in again. Soon after, my parents filed for bankruptcy. Their debts were written off, but the price was high. They lost the house, our old house with the living room where I once slept among the portraits, with the garden where my grandfather planted his beloved Amandus. They had to move to a modest apartment. And for the first time, I did not feel guilty. Despite everything that had happened between us, and despite the chill that had surrounded our last conversations, I was still surprised to learn that my parents had managed to get jobs, albeit temporary ones, through a temp agency, and that they, like so many who had been pushed to the brink, were now facing a new reality in which every dollar required real work. Ironically, My father had been assigned to the very construction site where I had once worked nights as a security guard, exhausting myself to the point of sending them money. On his first day, as soon as he arrived on the site, one of the workers, not recognizing him, exclaimed, "Oh, it's the old man, come help me out here." Then he added, "There used to be a young woman here, working hard, sending money to help her parents. I'd like to meet those parents, forcing their daughter to work on a construction site." I was told that my father's expression changed in an instant. The face that always wore a mask of confidence and rightness suddenly became stern, as if these words cut through something in him that he himself did not dare to admit to himself. Meanwhile, Mara, having lost all illusions and opportunities, finally said goodbye to her dream of a modeling career. She tried to go into nightlife, thinking that she could find her place there, maybe even recognition, and, as she thought, easy money. But it turned out that her egocentric character and manner of talking only about herself, as if she still shines on the covers of magazines, quickly began to irritate customers, and she began to be fired from one club after another. At some point, she found herself in a small bar, where she could barely make ends meet, serving drinks to equally lost people. Her lifestyle began to reflect on her face: fatigue, disappointment, those small wrinkles near the eyes and on the forehead that cannot be hidden by foundation or the light at the bar. When she tried to talk about the past, about her glory days, visitors laughed. "A model? Who are you kidding? Look at yourself." And these ridicule, probably, were worse for her than being fired. I had long ago severed all ties with my family, stopped answering calls, letters, messages, even if they were filled with guilt or pity. I chose to live for myself. To build my life from scratch, without debt and without false loyalty. 6 years have passed. 6 years without expectations, without manipulation, without the weight of other people's decisions on my shoulders. During this time, I became different, calm, confident, respected in my profession. And then, one clear spring day, I found myself at the wedding of Scarlett, the same woman who once helped me get back on my feet, who saw in me not a debtor, but a person. The wedding took place in a small chapel on the beach in Tampa, Florida, and as we stood under the arch, and before us the blue expanse of the ocean stretched endlessly, for the first time in a long time I felt a real, genuine sense of a beginning, not fear, but bright anticipation. Scarlett's husband stood next to her, beaming with happiness, his arm around her shoulders in the way you only hug someone you're afraid of losing. Scarlett, who had dedicated herself to her career for years and believed that love was a weakness, suddenly opened up to her feelings and, to her own surprise, allowed herself to fall in love with a colleague. She leaned toward me, smiling with that same look that always sees deeper than it appears, and said, "Amanda, you should face your feelings too." Her husband laughed and added jokingly, "Just don't throw me out, okay? You kind of need me." Everyone around me laughed, and I looked at them and felt a new thought blossoming inside me along with the warm sea breeze. The thought of the freedom that Scarlett helped me find, the freedom to be myself, to choose, to love, to let go. I hugged Scarlett, pressing myself against her, and whispered, "Be happy. I am so grateful to you, for everything." And when the party was drawing to a close, when the sun was setting, painting the sky in golden pink hues, Scarlett led me to a man, tall, reserved, with a soft but confident smile. "Amanda, I want you to meet Ethan," she said. "You seem to be cut from the same cloth." I smiled back, slightly embarrassed. Ethan, or as his friends called him, Aiton, turned out to be the director of an architectural firm, a man with an open gaze and a lively interest in the interlocutor. We began to talk, first about work, then about books, then about traveling, and suddenly I realized that I was already laughing, catching his intonations, and something light, pleasant, long forgotten was born in my chest. We had arranged to have dinner together, and as the evening slowly covered everything around us with velvety blue, I felt something warm growing inside me, as if the amanthus, the flower that my grandfather loved so much, was beginning to bloom again. Moving forward, I was no longer afraid to combine work and love, success and tenderness, boundaries and openness. I was determined to live a full, beautiful, free life. And looking at the sunset, I whispered into the silence, "Grandfather, if you can hear me, please continue to watch over me from above. I promise, I will make sure that I truly bloom." And as I said it, a smile appeared on my face of its own accord, not forced, but real. Because for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to the future.